Hello.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Bal Mataji. Just give 1 minute, Mataji. We'll start.
Okay, Prabhuji.
You remember where to read from, Mataji? I'm trying to find it out. I had to finish the college.
Prabhuji, from page 28, right? No?
Yeah. During his 4th year at Scottish churches. You finished that, right? Okay. Okay, let's start it off. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swa Padantikam Namavam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirbhisesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine. Reading from chapter 2, and it's going to be from okay, so Prabhupada is finishing his college, but he was also getting attracted to the Swarajya movement. During his 4th year at Scottish Church, Abhay began to feel reluctant about accepting his degree. As a sympathizer to the nationalist cause, he preferred national schools and self-government over the British institutions. But he could see that as yet no such alternatives existed. Gandhi, however, was calling on Indian students to forsake their studies. The foreign-run schools, he said, instill a slave mentality. They made one no more than a puppet in the hands of the British. Still, a college degree was the basis of a life's career. Abhay weighed their choices carefully. Gaur Mohan did not want Abhay to do something he would later regret. He had always tried to plan the best for his son, but Abhay was 23 and would have to make this decision for himself. Gaur Mohan thought of the future. The horoscope said his son would be a great religious preacher at age 70. But Gaur Mohan did not expect to live to see it. Still, he had every reason to accept the horoscope as accurate, and he wanted to prepare Abhay. He tried to plan things accordingly, but there was no way to guess what Krishna would do. Everything depended on Krishna, and Krishna was above nationalism, above planning and the laws of astrology, and above the desires of a modest cloth merchant aspiring to make his son a pure devotee of Srimati Radharani and a preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam. Although Gaur Mohan had always allowed Abhay to do what he wanted, he had also carefully guided him always on the path he knew was best. Now, without interfering with Abhay's decision with college, Gaur Mohan set about to arrange good employment for him, regardless of what else might happen. So in 1920, Abhay completed his 4th year of college and took the BA exam. Afterwards, with the ordeal of final examinations behind him, he took a short vacation. To fulfill a long cherished desire, he traveled alone a day's journey by train to Jagannath Puri. Srila Prabhupada. Every day of my boyhood, I used to think how to go to Jagannath Puri and how to go to Vrindavan. At that time, the fare was for Vrindavan 4 or 5 rupees, and similarly for Jagannath Puri. So I was thinking, when shall I go? So I took the first opportunity to go to Jagannath Puri. He walked along the same broad streets where for thousands of years the Radhayatra procession had passed. In the market, shops displayed small carved and painted wooden murtis of Lord Jagannath. Although it was not Radhayatra season, tourists were purchasing souvenirs. And in the temple, they purchased Jagannath Prasadam. In the Jagannath temple, 56 gigantic offerings of cooked rice and vegetables were presented daily in worship before the deities of Jagannatha, Balaram, and Subhadra. Abhay entered the temple and saw the deities. On a side altar stood the Murti of Lord Chaitanya in his six-armed form, manifesting himself simultaneously as Krishna, Rama, and the sannyasi Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was famous in Puri, where he had spent the last 18 years of his life, conducting Hare Krishna Kirtana with his followers and dancing ecstatically at the yearly Rath Yatras as the carts were wheeled along the main road, surrounded by thousands of devotees. Lord Chaitanya had danced and swooned in ecstasy of his intense love in separation from Lord Krishna. Passing out the parade route, Abhay recalled his own childhood pastimes, singing and dancing on the street, the miniature cart, the procession, Jagannath smiling, his father and mother Radha Govinda. Somehow, the fame of the Lord Jagannath had inspired him as a child, and it had remained within him all these years. When shall I go to Jagannath Puri? His childhood dream of Puri and Vrindavan, and his compulsively studying the train table, scheming since the age of 5 to travel here, were based on more than just a desire to tour Puri's marketplace. And he was not satisfied by once seeing the deity in the noisy, crowded temple. He had been impelled to come to Puri as a pilgrim, and his motive was devotion to Krishna. Now, nationalism was strongly influencing his life, and he had recently married and was facing the decision of graduation and career. Yet here he was hardly more than a boy walking alone in Puri, where Lord Chaitanya had lived and where Lord Krishna Jagannatha still resided. Abhay released his break from the pressure of duties in Calcutta. He did not know how the love he felt for Krishna and Krishna's pilgrim place would fit into his life. He knew that Krishna was more important than anything else. He was God, the supreme controller, and everyone's inner guide. But there was so much token, superficial service to God. Even the nationalist speakers, although they carried the Gita on their person, were more intent on nationalism than on Krishna. Only those who were sincere devotees knew the importance and attraction of Krishna, people like his father. So Prabhupada, I think he's reflecting in this break time, and the question is very apt. He's in Puri on the roads where Jagannath cart was drawn and Lord Chaitanya was danced. So he was really introspecting and reflecting. He's calling for pure devotion and pulling duties of the life to school and college and family and so on. So an odd incident occurred at Puri. Gaurav Mohan had given Abhay a letter of introduction to an acquaintance who lived in Jagannath Puri. Abhay went to see him and was well received. When the man was offering him lunch, however, Abhay noticed a small lump within one of the cooking pots. He questioned his host, who replied, "Oh, it is a meat." Abhay was unable to restrain his shock. "No, what is this? I had never taken meat." Abhay looked at his host in astonishment. "I never expected this at Jagannath Puri." Ashamed, his host said, "I did not know. I thought this was the best." Abhay pacified the man, but he put his food aside and took no more meals there. After that, Abhay ate only the Jagannath Prasadam from the temple. Abhay stayed in Puri for 3 or 4 days, wandering around the holy places and visiting the famous Puri seaside with its sparkling beach and strongly pounding surf. Several times he recognized some of the priests from the Jagannath temple as they smoked cigarettes, and he heard of other unsavory activities of the sadhus connected with the temple. What kind of sadhus were these? Who ate fish with their Jagannath prasadam and smoked? In this respect, he found Jagannath Puri disappointing. So when Abhay returned home, he found his young wife crying. Then he heard how her friends had told her, "Your husband is not coming back." He told her not to worry. There was no truth in the story. He had only gone for a few days and was now back. Although his marriage had only recently begun, Abhay was dissatisfied. Radharani Datta was an attractive young girl, but Abhay had never really liked her. He was thinking maybe a different wife would be better, a second wife besides this one. In India, it was socially acceptable to marry a second wife. So Abhay decided to take the matter into his own hands. He made arrangements to approach the parents of another girl, but when his father heard about it, he called Abhay and said, "My dear boy, you are eager to take a second wife, but I would advise you not to. It is Krishna's grace that your present wife is not your liking. Take it as a great fortune. If you do not become too attached to your wife and family, that will help you in your future advancement in spiritual life." Abhay accepted his father's advice. He wanted to obey his father and he appreciated the saintly viewpoint. But he remained thoughtful, a bit awed by his father's forethought, and he wondered how one day in the future he would be advancing in spiritual life and be grateful that his father had done this. Your future advancement in spiritual life. Abhay liked the idea. He reconciled himself to the wife he had been given. I see number of uh, devotees joining. Anyone want to read from here?
I want to read Prabhuji.
Yeah, sure, Mother.
Abhay Charan De's name was included on the posted list of students who had passed the BA exams and who were invited to appear for their diploma. But Abhay had decided he did not want a diploma from Scottish Churches College. Although, as a graduate, he would have a promising career. It would be a British trained career. If Gandhi succeeded, India would soon be rid of the British. Abhay had made his decision, and when graduation day arrived, the college authorities learned of his rejecting his diploma. In this way, Abhay registered his protest and signaled his response to Gandhi's call. Gandhi's protest had increased its pitch in recent months. During the war, Indians had remained loyal to the crown in hopes of generating British sympathy towards the cause of independence. But in 1919, England had passed the Rowlatt Act to repress the move for Indian freedom. Gandhi had then called on all Indians to observe a Hartal, a day in which people all over the country had stayed home from work and school in protest. Although it had been a non-violent protest, 1 week later in Amritsar, in the public square known as Jala, Jallianwala Bagh, British soldiers shot to death hundreds of unarmed, defenseless Indians who had gathered for a peaceful meeting. Gandhi then lost all faith in the intentions of the empire towards India, calling for complete non-cooperation. He ordered a boycott of everything: British commodities, schools, courts, military honors, and Abhay, in refusing his degree, was moving to align himself more closely with Gandhi's independence movement. But his heart was not in it, just as he had never given his heart to college students, to earning a degree, to his wife. And so he was reserved about becoming a full fledged nationalist. Abhay had become inclined towards the cause, but never really convinced. Now, out of school, out of work, caring little of his career, education, or wife, he remained at home. He tried his hand at writing poetry for the occasion of a friend's wedding. He read Srimad Bhagavatam and the latest speeches of Gandhi. He had no immediate plans. Gaurav Mohan had his plans for Abhay, and the college degree had an integral part of those plans. But Krishna, it seemed, had other plans. The political protest of refusing the Bachelor of Arts degree was more a mark of honor than a social stigma. And Gaurav Mohan did not reapproach his son for it. But Abhay still needed to take up some kind of work. Gaurav Mohan approached his friend Karthik Bose and asked him to employ Abhay. Dr. Karthik Chandra Bose, an intimate friend, had been the family doctor since Abhay's childhood. He was a distinguished surgeon, a medical scholar, and a chemical industrialist. He had his own establishment, Both's laboratory in Calcutta. When he manufactured drugs, scraps, and other products for the pharmaceutical industry, Dr. Bose was well known throughout India as the first Indian to manufacture pharmaceutical preparations that had formerly been monopolized by European firms. He agreed to accept Abhay as a department manager at his laboratory. Although Abhay knew little of the pharmaceutical industry or of management, he felt confident that by reading a few related books, he could learn what he needed to know. But when this new young man was suddenly given the post of department engineer, several workers became dissatisfied. Some of them were elderly and had been 40 years with the firm. They voiced their dissatisfaction amongst themselves and finally confronted Dr. Bose. Why had this young man been put in charge? Dr. Bose replied, "Oh, for that position, I needed someone I could trust like my own son. He is signing checks for 40,000 rupees. I could only entrust the personal handling of my accounts in that department to him. His father and I are very close, and this young man is known to me practically as my son." Gaura Mohan felt he had done his best. His prayer was that the principles of pure Vaishnavism he had taught his son would stay with him and guide him throughout his life. Gandhi and the cause of Swaraj had disrupted Abhay's college career, and Abhay was still inclined towards nationalism, but not so much for a political motive as for a spiritual vision. So Gaurav Mohan was content. He knew the marriage arrangement was not pleasing to Abai, but Abai had accepted his explanation. The detachment from wife and family affairs would be good for spiritual advancement, and Abai was showing an inherent disinterest in materialistic affairs. This also did not displease Gaura Mohan, to whom business had always been subservient to his worship of Lord Krishna. He had expected this. Now Abai had a promising job and would be making the best of his marriage. Gaura Mohan had done what he could, and he depended on Krishna for the ultimate result. Gandhi, blustered by his emergency as a leader among the Congress party, now openly attacked the empire's exploitative cloth trade with India. England was purchasing raw cotton from India at the lowest prices, manufacturing it into cloth in the Lan- Lancashire mills in England, and then selling the monopolized cloth at high prices to the Indian millions. Gandhi's propaganda was that India should return to making her own cloth using simple spinning wheels and handlooms, thus completely boycotting the British made cloth and attacking an economic base of Britain's power over India. Traveling by train throughout the country, Gandhi repeatedly appealed to his congressmen to reject all foreign cloth and wear only the simple coarse khadi produced from India's own cottage industry. Before the British rule, India had spun and woven her own cloth. Gandhi argued that by breaking the cottage industries, the British were sinking the Indian masses into semi starvation and lifelessness. To set the example, Gandhi himself worked daily at a primitive spinning wheel and wore only a simple, coarse loin cloth and a shawl. He would hold meetings and ask people to come forth and reject their imported cloth. On the spot, people would throw down heaps of cloth and would set it ablaze. Gandhi's wife complained that the khadi was too thick and not convenient to wear while cooking. Also, she asked if while cooking she could wear the light British made cloth. Yes, you are free to cook with your milk cloth on, Gandhi had told her, but I must exercise a similar freedom by not taking the meal so prepared. The cause of cottage industry appealed to Abai. He too was not enamored with the modern industrial advances the British had introduced in India. Not only was simple living good for the long time national economy of hundreds of millions of Indians, as Gandhi was emphasizing, but to Abai it was also the way of life most conducive to spiritual culture. Abai put aside his mill manufactured cloth and took to wearing khadi. Now his dress revealed him to whomever he met, British and Indian alike. He was a nationalist, a sympathizer of revolution. To wear khadi in India in the early 1920s was not a mere clothing fad. It was a political statement. It meant he was a Gandhian.
Hey, how to finish the chapter? You want to share some of your experience, Mataji?
Uh, Prabhuji, not much to share because here the
Hmm.
most of the topic is on Gandhi. But the before paragraph, like he studied, like you studied the point, right? Like he Abhay Prabhupada is not satisfied with his wife, and his father stole Krishna's grace. Um, so that will make your spiritual advancement. Okay, whatever Krishna um, arranged for us, we have
Arrange
to
for us.
accept. We have to
Yeah.
accept it. That's
Mm.
maybe that's a good thing for our spiritual advancement. We have to think in that way. Actually, it made Prabhupada easy to leave his wife and kids, right? Like,
Yeah.
hmm, and not that much point, Prabhuji, but
Mm.
I'll read this chapter 3.
Yeah, sure, Mataji. Moving to chapter 3
Chapter
is
3.
going to be a special chapter. Hmm.
Nice chapter, yes. A very nice, saintly person. There has not been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefits is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Abhay's friend Narendranath Mullik was insistent. He wanted Abhay to see a sadhu from Mayapur. Naren and some of his friends had already met the sadhu at his nearby ashrama and Ulta Ulta uh, Ulta Danga
Ultadanga.
Ultadanga Junction Road. And now they wanted Abbay's opinion. Everyone within their circle of friends considered Abbay the leader. So if Naren could tell the others that Abbay also had a high regard for the sadhu, then that would confirm their own estimations. Abbay was reluctant to go, but Naren pressed him. They stood talking amidst that passers by on the crowded early evening street as the traffic of horse drawn hackneys, ox carts, and occasional auto taxis and motor buses moved noisily on the road. Naren put his hand firmly around his friend's arm, trying to drag him forward, while Abhay smiled but stubbornly pulled the other way. Naren argued that since they were only a few blocks away, they should at least pay a short visit. Abhay laughed and asked to be excused. People could see that the two young men were friends, but it was a curious sight. The handsome young man, dressed in white khadi kurta and dhoti, being pulled along by his friend. Naren explained that the sadhu, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, was a Vaishnava and a great devotee of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of his disciples, a sannyasi, had visited the Mullik house and had invited to meet Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. A few of the Mulliks had gone to see him and had been very much impressed. But Abe remained skeptical. Oh no, I know all these sadhus. He said, I am not going. Abai had seen many sadhus in his childhood. Every day, his father had entertained at least three or four in his home. Some of them were no more than beggars, and some even smoked ganja. Gaura Mohan had been very liberal in allowing anyone who wore the saffron robes of a sannyasi to come. But did it mean that though a man was no more than a beggar or ganja smoker, he had to be considered saintly just because he dressed as a sannyasi or was collecting funds in the name of building or monastery or could influence people with his speech? No, by and large, they were a disappointing lot. Abhay had even seen a man in his neighborhood who was a beggar by occupation. In the morning, when others dressed in their work clothes and went to their jobs, this man would put on saffron cloth and go out to beg, and in this way earn his livelihood. But was it fitting that that such so-called sadhu he paid a respectful visit as if he were a guru? Naren argued that he felt that this particular sadhu was a very learned scholar and that Abhay should at least meet him and judge for himself. Abhay wished that Naren would not behave this way, but finally he could no longer refuse his friend. Together they walked past the Prashant Jain temple to Ultadanga with its sign Bhakti Vinoda Asana, announcing it to be the quarters of the Gaudiya Mutt. When they inquired at the door, a young man recognized Mr. Mullik. Naren had previously given a donation and immediately escorted them up to the roof of the second floor and into the presence of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who was sitting and enjoying the early evening atmosphere with a few disciples and guests. Sitting with his back very straight, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati appeared tall. He was slender, his arms were long, and his complexion was fair and golden. He wore round bifocals with simple frames. His nose was sharp,
Oh,
his forehead broad, and his expression was very scholarly yet not at all timid. The vertical markings of Vaishnava Tilak on his forehead were familiar to Abhay, as were the simple sannyasa robes that draped over his right shoulder, leaving the other shoulder and half his chest bare. He wore tulasi neck beads, and the clay Vaishnava markings of Tilak were visible at his throat, shoulder, and upper arms. A clean white Brahminical thread was looped around his neck and draped across his chest. Abhay and Naren, having both been raised in Vaishnava families, immediately offered prostrated obeisances at the sight of the revered sannyasi. While the two young men were still rising and preparing to sit before any preliminary formalities of conversation had begun, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta immediately said to them, "You are educated young men. Why don't you preach Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message throughout the whole world?" Abhay could hardly believe what he had just heard. They had not even exchanged views. Yet this sadhu was telling them what should they do. Sitting face to face with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Abhay was gathering his wits and trying to gain a comprehensible impression. But this person had already told them to become preachers and go all over the world.
mm,
Abhay was immediately impressed, but he was not going to drop his intelligent skepticism. After all, they were assumptions in what the sadhu had said. Abhay had already announced himself by his dress to be a follower of Gandhi, and he felt the impulse to raise an argument. Yet, as he continued to listen to Bhakti Siddhanta speak, he also began to feel won over by the sadhu's strength of conviction. He could sense that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta did not care for anything but Lord Chaitanya, and that this was what made him great. This was why followers had gathered around him, and why Abhay himself felt drawn, inspired, and humbled, and wanted to hear more. But he felt obliged to make an argument to test the truth.
mm.
Drawn irresistibly
Discussion.
into discussion, Abhay spoke up in answer to the words Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had so tersely spoken in the first seconds of their meeting. Who will hear your Chaitanya's message? Abhay queried. We are a dependent country. First, India must become independent. How can we spread Indian culture if we are under British rule? Abhay had not asked ha- heartily just to be provocative, yet his question was clearly a challenge. If he were to take this sadhu's remark to them as a serious one, and there was nothing in Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's demeanor to indicate that he had not been serious. Abhay felt compelled to question how could he propose? How how he could propose such a thing while India was still dependent. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta replied in a quiet, deep voice that Krishna consciousness did not have to wait for a change in India politics, nor was it dependent on who ruled. Krishna consciousness was so important, so exclusively important, that it could not wait. Abhay was struck by his boldness. How could he say such a thing? The whole world of India, beyond this little Ultadanga rooftop, was in turmoil and seemed to support what Abhay had said. Many famous leaders of Bengal, many saints, even Gandhi himself, men who were educated and spiritually minded, all might very well have asked the same question, challenging this sadhu's relevancy, and yet he was dismissing everything and everyone as if they were of no consequence. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta continued, whether one power or another ruled was a temporary situation, but the eternal reality is Krishna consciousness, and the real self is the spirit soul. No man made political system, therefore, could actually help humanity. This was the verdict of the Vedic scriptures and the line of spiritual masters. Although everyone is an eternal servant of God, when one takes himself to be the temporary body and regards the nation of his birth as worshipable, he becomes under illusion. The leaders and followers of the world's political movements, including the movement for Swaraj, were simply cultivating this illusion. Real welfare work, whether individual, social, or political, should help prepare a person for his next life and help him re establish his eternal relationship with the Supreme. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had articulated these ideas many times before in his writings. There has been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefits is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe. The kindness that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had shown to Jivas absolves them eternally from all wants, from all inconveniences, and from all the distresses. That kindness does not produce any evil, and the Jivas who have it will not be the victims of the evils of the world. As Abhay listened attentively to the arguments of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he recalled a Bengali poet who had written that even less advanced civilizations like China and Japan were independent, and yet India labored under political oppression. Abhay knew well the philosophy of nationalism, which stressed the Indian independence had to come first, and oppressed people was a reality. The British slaughter of innocent citizens was a reality, and independence would benefit people. Spiritual life was a luxury that could be afforded only after independence. In the present times, the cause of national liberation from the British was the only relevant spiritual movement. The people's cause was in itself God. Yet, because Abhay had been raised a Vaishnava, he appreciated what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta was saying. Abhay had already concluded that this was certainly not just another questionable sadhu, and he pursued the truth in what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta said. This sadhu was not concocting his own philosophy, and he was not simply proud or belligerent, even though he spoke in a way that kicked out practically every other philosophy. He was speaking the eternal teachings of the Vedic literature and the sages, and Abhay loved to hear it. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, speaking sometimes in English and sometimes in Bengali and sometimes quoting the Sanskrit verses of the Bhagavad Gita, spoke of Sri Krishna as the highest Vedic authority. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna had declared that a person should give up whatever duty he considers religious and surrender unto him, the personality of Godhead. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja. And the Srimad Bhagavatam confirmed the same thing. Dharma purojita hita kaitavaro tra paramo nirmata sharanam satam shatam. All other forms of religion are impure and should be thrown out. And only Bhagavata Dharma, performing one's duty to please the Supreme Lord, should remain. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's presentation was so cogent that anyone who accepted the Shastras would have to accept his conclusion. The people were now faithless, said Bhakti Siddhanta, and therefore they no longer believed that devotional service could remove all anomalies, even on the political scene. He went on to criticize anyone who was ignorant of the soul and yet claimed to be a leader. He even cited names of contemporary leaders and pointed out their failures. And he emphasized the urgent need to render the highest good to humanity by educating people about the eternal soul and the soul's relation to Krishna and devotional service. Abhay had never forgotten the worship of Lord Krishna or his teachings in Bhagavad Gita, and his family had always worshipped Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose mission Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was espousing. As these Gaudiya Mutt people worshipped Krishna, he had also worshipped Krishna throughout his life and had never forgotten Krishna. But now he was astonished to hear the Vaishnava philosophy presented so masterfully. Despite his involvement in college, marriage, the national movement, and other affairs, he had never forgotten Krishna. But Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was now stirring up within him his original Krishna consciousness. And by the words of this spiritual master, not only was he remembering Krishna, but he felt his Krishna consciousness being enhanced 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. What had been unspoken in Abhay's boyhood, what had been vague in Jagannath Puri, what he had been distracted from at college, what he had been protected in by his father, now surged forth within Abhay in responsive feelings, and he wanted to keep it. He felt himself defeated, but he liked it. He suddenly realized that he had never before been defeated, but this defeat was not a loss, it was an immense gain. Srila Prabhupada, I was from a Vaishnava family, so I could appreciate what he was preaching. Of course, he was speaking to everyone, but he found something in me, and I was convinced about his argument and mode of presentation. I was so much struck with wonder. I could understand. Here is the proper person who can give a real religious idea. It was late. Abhay and Naren had been talking with him for more than 2 hours. Out of the One of the brahmacharis gave them each a bit of prasadam in their own open palms, and they rose gratefully and took their leave. They walked down the stairs and onto the street. The night was dark. Here and there a light was burning, and there were some open shops. Abhay pondered in great satisfaction what he had just heard. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's explanation of the independence movement as a temporary, incomplete cause had made a deep impression on him. He felt himself less a nationalist and more a follower of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Jai. He also thought that it would have been better if he were not married. This great personality was asking him to preach. He could have immediately joined, but he was married, and to leave his family would be an injustice. Walking away from the ashrama, Naren turned to his friend. So, Abhay, what was your impression? What do you think of him? He is wonderful, replied Abhay. The message of Lord Chaitanya is in the hands of a very expert person, Srila Prabhupada. I accepted him as my spiritual master immediately, not officially, but in my heart. I was thinking that I had met a very saintly person. After his first meeting with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Abhay began to associate more with the Gaudiya Mutt devotees. They gave him books and told him the history of their spiritual master. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was one of the 10 children born to Bhakti Vinoda Thakura, a great Vaishnava teacher in the disciplic line from Lord Chaitanya himself. Before the time of Bhakti Vinoda, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya had been obscured by teachers and sects falsely claiming to be the followers of Lord Chaitanya, but deviating in various drastic ways from his pure teachings. The good reputation of Vaishnavism had been compromised. Bhakti Vinoda Thakuran, however, through his prolific writings and through his social position as a high government officer, re-established the respectability of Vaishnavism. He preached that the teachings of Lord Chaitanya were the highest form of theism and were intended not for a particular sect or religion or nation, but for all the people of the world. He prophesied that Lord Chaitanya's teachings would go worldwide and yet uh, yearned for it. The religious preached by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is universal and not exclusive. The principle of Kirtan has the future church of the world invites all classes of men without distinction of caste or clan to the highest cultivation of the spirit. This church, it appears, will extend all over the world and take the place of all sectarian churches which exclude outsiders from the precincts of the mosque, church, or temple. Lord Chaitanya did not advent himself to liberate only a few men of India. Rather, his main objective was to emancipate all living entities of all countries throughout the entire universe and preach the eternal religion. Lord Chaitanya says in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, in every town, country, and village, my name will be sung. There is no doubt that this unquestionable order will come to pass. Although there is still no pure society of Vaishnavas to be had, yet Lord Chaitanya's prophetic words will in a few days come true. I am sure, why not? Nothing is absolutely pure in the beginning. From imperfection, purity will come out. Oh, for that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German, and American people will take up banners, mrudangas, and kartals and raise kirtan through their streets and towns. When will that day come? As a prominent magistrate, Bhakti Vinoda Thakura was a responsible government officer. He served also as a superintendent of the temple of Lord Jagannatha and was the father of 10 children. Yet, in spite of these responsibilities, he served the cause of Krishna with prodigious energy. After coming home from his office in the evening, taking his meals and going to bed, he would sleep from 8 until midnight and then get up and write until morning. He wrote more than 100 books during his life, many of them in English. One of his important contributions with the cooperation of Jagannath Dasa Babaji and Gaura Kishore Dasa Babaji was to locate the exact birthplace of Lord Chaitanya in Mayapur, about 60 miles north of Calcutta. While working to reform Gaudiya Vaishnavism in India, he prayed to Lord Chaitanya, your teachings have been much depreciated. It is not in my power to restore them. And he prayed for a son to help him in his preaching. When, on February 6, 1874, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was born to Bhakti Vinoda Thakura in Jagannath Puri. The Vaishnavas considered him the answer to his father's prayers. He was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and draped across his chest like the sacred thread worn by Brahmanas. His parents gave him the name Bimala Prasada. When Bimala Prasada was 6 months old, the carts of the Jagannath festival stopped at the gate of Bhakti Vinoda's residence and for 3 days could not be moved. Bhakti Vinoda Thakura's wife brought the infant onto the cart and approached the deity of Lord Jagannatha. Spontaneously, the infant extended his arms and touched the feet of Lord Jagannatha and was immediately blessed with a garland that fell from the body of the Lord. When Bhakti Vinoda Thakura learned that the Lord's garland had fallen onto his son, he realized that this was the son for whom he had prayed. One day, when Bimala Prasada was still a child of not more than 4 years, his father mildly rebuked him for eating a mango not yet duly offered to Lord Krishna. Bimala Prasad, although only a child, considered himself an offender to the Lord and vowed never to eat mangoes again. This was a vow that he would follow throughout his life. By the time Bimala Prasada was 7 years old, he had memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita and could even explain its verses. His father then began training him in proofreading and printing. In conjunction with the publishing of the Vaishnava magazine, Sajana Tasani. With his father, he visited many holy places and heard discourses from the learned Panditas. As a student, Bimala Prasada preferred to read the books written by his father instead of the school texts. By the time he was 25, he had become well versed in Sanskrit, mathematics, and astronomy, and he had established himself as the author and publisher of many magazine articles and one book, Surya Siddhanta, for which he received the epithet Siddhanta Saraswati in recognition of his eri- erudition. When he was 26, his father guided him to take initiation from a renounced Vaishnava saint, Gaura Kishore Dasa Babaji, who advised him to preach who advised him to preach the absolute truth and keep aside all other works. Receiving the blessings of Gaurakishore Dasa Babaji, Bimala Prasada, now Siddhanta Saraswati, resolved to dedicate his body, mind, and words to the service of Lord Krishna. In 1905, Siddhanta Saraswati took a vow to chant the Hare Krishna mantra 1 billion times. Residing in Mayapur in a grass hut near the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. He chanted the Hare Krishna mantra day and night. He cooked rice once a day in an earthen pot and ate nothing more. He slept on the ground, and when the rainwater leaked through the grass ceiling, he sat beneath an umbrella chanting. In 1911, while his aging father was lying ill, Siddhanta Saraswati took up a challenge against pseudo Vaishnavas who claimed that ca- birth in their caste was the prerequisite for preaching Krishna consciousness. The caste consciousness Brahmana community had become incensed by Bhakti Vinoda Thakura's presentation of many scriptural proofs that anyone, regardless of birth, could become a Brahmana Vaishnava. These smart Brahmanas, out to prove the inferiority of the Vaishnavas, arranged a discussion on behalf of his indisposed father. Young Siddhanta Saraswati wrote an essay, The Conclusive Difference Between the Brahmana and the Vaishnava, and submitted it before his father. Despite his poor health, Bhakti Vinoda Thakura was elated to hear the arguments that would soundly defeat the challenge of the Smartas. Siddhant
Mante,
Saraswati.
you want to take a moment
to share your
Okay. Okay,
highlights or
Prabhuji.
experience? Mm.
Yes, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, see, like Krishna gives Guru and the Guru gives Krishna. In the
Mm.
same way, like since Gaura Mohan, like Srila Prabhupada's father trained Prabhupada to become a good Vaishnava, and he's already a devotee of Krishna. Krishna arranged a nice spiritual master to him. In that way, with his friend, he met a, because everything is an arrangement of Krishna. He met
Mm.
like Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and with his first talking, only with his first speech only, he got very attracted and realized, okay, this is the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and he was very impressed to take up this. And he thought to his, not officially, but with his heart, he thought that he is my spiritual master. In that way,
Mm.
like, and he was thinking and what he said and everything. And later
Mm.
his friend told about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and who he is, and he is the son of a great um, great
Vaishnava.
Vaishnava in the parampara. And
Mm.
I'm reading about Bhakti Vinoda Thakura now. Yeah, he's a great Vaishnava, and he prayed for a good son, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati born. And he got a like Surya Siddhanta, a book he was written, and he was very scholarly. He looks very attractive. It's like there is a good description of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Even in the Parampara picture also, we can see that glow and everything, right, Prabhuji? Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. I mean, like strong and firm in his decisions, and
Yeah.
he was representing Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his
Mm. Mm.
mood. Mhm. That's it,
Nice.
Prabhuji. Mm.
Nice.
Um,
Let's see if anyone wants to read.
okay, thank you, Prabhuji. Mm.
Otherwise, we'll go back to ourselves. Anyone else want to read on the call?
I can read, Prabhu. This is
Yes,
Sudha.
Mataji. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Will you be sharing, Prabhu? I don't have the book with me.
Yeah, I'm sharing, Mataji.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sharing on the phone, so it is just going hither and thither. Okay.
Okay. Siddhanta Saraswati then traveled to Midnapur, where Panditas from all over India had gathered for a 3-day discussion. Some of the Smarta Panditas who spoke first claimed that anyone born in a Shudra family, even though initiated by a spiritual master, could never become purified and perform the Brahminical duties of worshipping the deity or initiating disciples. Finally, Siddhanta Saraswati delivered his speech. He began quoting Vedic references glorifying the Brahmanas, and at this, the Smarta scholars became very much pleased. But when he began discussing the actual qualifications for becoming a Brahmana, the qualities of the Vaishnavas, the relationship between the two, and who, according to the Vedic literature, is qualified to become a spiritual master and initiate disciples, then the joy of the Vaishnava haters disappeared. Siddhanta Saraswati conclusively proved from the scriptures that if one is born in a Shudra but exhibits the qualities of a Brahmana, the if one is born as a Shudra but exhibits the qualities of a Brahmana, then he should be honored as a Brahmana despite his birth. And if one is born in a Brahmana family but acts like a Shudra, then he is not a Brahmana. After his speech, Siddhanta Saraswati was congratulated by the president of the conference and thousands thronged around him. It was a victory for Vaishnavism. With the
Mm.
passing away of his father in 1914 and his spiritual master in 1915, Siddhanta Saraswati continued the mission of Lord Chaitanya. He assumed editorship of Sajana Toshani and established the Bhagavad Press in Krishnanagar. Then in 1918, in Mayapur, he sat down before a picture of Gaurakishore Das Babaji and initiated himself into the sannyas order. At this time, he assumed the sannyas title Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was dedicated to using the printing press and as the best medium for large-scale distribution of Krishna consciousness. He thought of the printing press as a Brihad Mridanga, a big mridanga. Although the mridanga drum had traditionally been used to accompany kirtana, even during the time of Lord Chaitanya, and uh, even during the time of Lord Chaitanya, and although Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself led kirtan parties and sent groups of devotees chanting in the streets and playing on the mridangas, such kirtans could be heard only for a block or two. But with the Brihat Mridanga, the big Mridanga drum of the printing press, the message of Lord Chaitanya could be spread all over the world. Most of the literature Abe began reading had been printed in the Bhagavad Press, which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had established in 1915. The Bhagavad Press had printed the Chaitanya Charitamrita with commentaries by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the Bhagavad Gita with commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti, and one after another the works of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This literature was a spiritual heritage coming from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who had appeared almost 500 years before. Abe had been a devotee of Lord Chaitanya since childhood, and he was familiar with the life of Lord Chaitanya through the well-known scriptures Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat. He had learned of Lord Chaitanya not only as the most ecstatic form of a pure devotee who had spread the chanting of the holy name to all parts of India, but also as the direct appearance of Sri Krishna himself in the form of Radha and Krishna combined. But now, for the first time, Akshay was in touch with the great wealth of literature compiled by the Lord's immediate associates and followers, passed down in disciplic succession and expanded on by great authorities. Lord Chaitanya's immediate followers, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami, and others, had compiled many volumes based on the Vedic scriptures and proving conclusively that Lord Chaitanya's teachings were the essence of Vedic wisdom. There were
Mm.
many books not yet published, but Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was intent on establishing many presses just to release the sound of the Brihad Mridanga for the benefit of all people. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was teaching the conclusion of Lord Chaitanya's teachings that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that the chanting of his holy name should be stressed above all other religious practices. In former ages, other methods of attaining to God had been available, but in the present age of Kali, only the chanting of Hare Krishna would be effective. On the authority of the scriptures such as the Brihad Naradiya Purana and the Upanishads, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had specifically called the Mahamantra, cited the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Lord Krishna himself had confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that the only method of attaining him was devotional service. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. Abe knew these verses, he knew the chanting, and he knew the conclusions of the Gita. But now, as he eagerly read the writings of the great acharyas, he had fresh realization of the scope of Lord Chaitanya's mission. Now he was discovering the depth of his own Vaishnava heritage and its efficacy for bringing about the highest welfare for people in an age destined to be full of troubles. I'll stop there, Prabhu. And he's written about how the book that he wrote, that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wrote about the difference between a Brahmana and a Vaishnava, and how he spoke about it. And the Brahmanas were not at all in agreement with him when he said that even though a person is born as a Shudra, if he has the qualities of a Brahmana, he should be respected as a Brahmana. And then vice versa, the other way around. If a Brahmana has qualities of a Shudra, then he is a Shudra. It is not by birth that you are either a Brahmana or a Vaishnava. It is by a dint of your qualities that you are. And then he also talks about how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was a follower of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Chaitanya's teachings, and the press that he created, the press, the first press to
Brihad
publish
Mridanga.
the Brihad Mridanga, as opposed to so that it's the big Mridanga, so that the teachings could go all over the world, a wider distribution of those teachings of Rupa, Sanatana, Jiva, all of them. and
Hmm.
also says that chanting is the Mahamantra is what what we should be doing in this yoga, and the efficacy of that Mahamantra, and other than all, it's above all other religious practices. And that was Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's firm belief, and that was what Abe was also following. And uh, there's how Abe was very, um, what is it, was very obliged or happy about his Vaishnava upbringing, because then that is what helped him to relate to everything that Bhakti
Yeah.
Saraswati was saying also.
He's just flowering now. He
Yeah,
has
it's just
been waiting
starting.
for this moment since the childhood,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
then he's just blossoming.
Krishna, yeah, like Mataji said, Krishna brought him to the right
Hmm.
point and to the right person.
Hmm.
Uh, and
Hmm.
that, yeah, all his arrangement. Amazing.
Hmm. Yes, Mate. Thank you, Mate. So, but Premate said she cannot read, so I will read now. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was often traveling, and Abhay was busy with his family and business. So, to arrange another meeting was not possible. Yet, from their first encounter, Abhay had considered Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati his spiritual master, and Abhay began thinking of him always. I have met such a nice, saintly person. Whenever possible, Abhay would seek out Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples, the members of the Gaudiya Math. As for Gandhi movement, Gandhi had suffered a bitter setback when his non-violent followers had blundered and committed violence during a protest. British had taken the opportunity to arrest Gandhi and sentenced him to 6 years in jail. Although his followers still revered him, the nationalist movement had lost much of its impetus. But regardless of that, Abhay was no longer interested. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had defeated his idea that the nationalist cause was India's first priority. He had invoked Abhay's original Krishna consciousness, and Abhay now felt confident that Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was the real priority. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had invited him to preach, and from that moment, Abhay had wanted to join the Gaudiya Math as one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples. But now, instead of his political inclinations, it was his family obligations that stood in the way. He was no longer thinking, first, let us become an independent nation, then preach about Lord Chaitanya. Now he was thinking, I cannot take part like the others. I have my family responsibilities. So the family was growing. In 1921, Abhay and his wife had their first child, a son, and there would be more children and more income would be needed. Earning money meant sacrificing time and energy, and it meant, at least externally, being distracted from Mishna Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Indian culture had the highest regard for the family institution, and divorce was unheard of. Even if a man was in great financial difficulty, he would remain with his wife and children. Although Abhay expressed regret at not being a sannyasi disciple in the Gaudiya Math, he never seriously considered leaving his young wife so early in their marriage. Gaur Mohan was pleased to hear of his son's attraction to a Vaishnav guru, but he never expected Abhay to abandon responsibilities and enter the renounced order. A Vaishnava could remain with his wife and family, practice spiritual life at home, and even become active in preaching. Abhay would have to find ways to serve the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a family man. Abhay thought if he were to become very successful in business, then he could spend money not only to support his family, but also to help support Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's mission of spreading Krishna consciousness.
An astrologer had even predicted that Abhay would become one of the wealthiest men in India. But with his present income, he could do little more than provided for his family's needs. He thought he might do better by trying to develop a business on his own. So Abhay expressed his feelings to Dr. Bose, who listened like a sympathetic father and suggested that Abhay become his agent for all of northern India. Abhay could purchase medicines, liniments, rectified spirits, toothpaste, and other items wholesale from Dr. Bose factory and travel widely throughout northern India, building up his own business. Also, Abhay had enough experience with Bose laboratory that he could try to make and market some of his own medicine and products. So Dr. Bose and Abhay decided mm, that the centrally located city of Allahabad would be a good place for Abhay to make his headquarters. In 1923, Abhay and his wife and child moved to Allahabad, a 12-hour train ride from northwest from Calcutta. So the British, one second, Matthew. The British, uh, so the British had once made Allahabad the capital of the United Provinces, and they had built many good buildings there, including buildings for a high court and a university. Europeans and affluent Indian families like the Nehrus lived in a modern, paved, well lit section of town. There was also another older section with ancient narrow streets closely lined with buildings and shops. So many Bengalis resided there, and it was there that Abhay decided to settle his family. He had chosen Allahabad, traditionally known as Prayag, as a good location for business. But it was also one of India's most famous places of pilgrimage. Situated at the confluence of the three holiest rivers of India, Ganges, Yamuna, and Saraswati, Allahabad was the site of two of India's most widely attended spiritual events, the annual Magha Mela and the Kumbh Mela, which took place every 12 years. And in search of spiritual purification, millions of pilgrims from all over India would converge here each year at the time of the full moon in the month of Magha, January, and bathe at the junction of the three sacred rivers. Abhay's home at 60 Bashahi Mundi consisted of a few rented rooms. For his business, he rented a small shop in the commercial center of the city at Johnston Gang Road, where he opened his dispensary, Prayag Pharmacy, and began selling medicines, tinctures, syrups, and other products manufactured by Bose's laboratory. He met an Allahabad physician, Dr. Ghosh, who was interested in a business partnership. So Abe asked him to become his attending physician and move his office to Prayag Pharmacy. Dr. Ghosh consented and closed his own shop, Tropical Pharmacy. At Prayag Pharmacy, Dr. Ghosh would diagnose patients and give medical prescriptions, which Abhay would fill. So Dr. Ghosh would then receive a 25% commission from the sale of the prescriptions. Abhay and Dr. Ghosh became friends, and they would visit at each other's home, and they treated each other's children like their own family members. Often they discussed their aspirations for increasing profits. Dr. Ghosh. Abhay was a business minded man. We were all God fearing, of course. In every home, we have a small temple and we must have deities. But he used to always talk about business and how to meet family expenses. Next paragraph. Although at home, Abhay wore a kurta and dhoti. Sometimes for business, he would dress in shirt and pants. He was good looking, full mustache, energetic young man in his late 20s. He and Radharanidhi now had two children. A daughter was born after they had been in Allahabad 1 year. Gaur Mohan, who was now 75, had come to live with him, as had Abhay's widowed sister Rajeshwari and her son Tulasi. Gaur Mohan mostly stayed at home, chanted on his beads, and worshipped the Salagram, Srila, deity of Krishna. He was satisfied that Abhay was doing right, and Abhay was satisfied to have his father living comfortably with him and freely worshipping Krishna. Abhay led a busy life. He was intent on building his business. By 8 a.m., he would go to his pharmacy, where he would meet Dr. Ghosh and begin his day's work. At noon, he would come home, and then he would return to the pharmacy in the late afternoon. He had purchased a large beak for 8,000 rupees, and although he never drove it himself, he let his nephew, good driver, use it for his taxi business. Occasionally, Abhay would use the car on his own business excursions, and his nephew would then act as his chauffeur. It so happened that both Motilal Nehru and his son Jawaharlal were customers at Prayag Pharmacy. Because Jawaharlal would always order Western medicine, Abhay thought he must have felt that Indian ways were inferior. Once, Jawaharlal approached Abhay for a political contribution, and Abhay donated, being a conscientious merchant. During the day, Abhay would talk with his customers and other friends who would stop by, and they would tell him many things. A former military officer used to tell Abhay stories of World War One. He told how Marshal Foch in France had one day ordered the killing of thousands of Belgian refugees whose maintenance had become a burden to him on the battlefield. A Mohammedan gentleman, a member of a royal family in Afghanistan, would come daily with his son to sit and chat. Abhay would listen to his visitors and converse pleasantly and make up their prescriptions. But his thoughts kept returning to his meeting with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He went over it again and again in his mind, how he had looked, his mannerisms, and what he had said. At night, Abhay would go home to his wife and children. Radharani was a chaste and faithful wife who spent her days cooking, cleaning, and caring for her two children. But she was not inclined to share her husband's interest in things spiritual. He could not convey to her his feelings about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So Abhay, his wife, the two children, Gaur Mohan, Abhay's younger brother Krishna Charan, Abhay's widowed sister Rajeshwari, and her son Tulsidas all went together to an Allahabad studio for a family portrait. This photo shows Abhay in his late 20s. He's thin and dark with a full mustache. His forehead is broad, his eyes dark and clear. He wears a white kurta and dhoti and plain dark slippers. He sits in a chair, his wife standing behind him, an attractive young woman in a white khadi sari with a line of color on the border. Her slim arms rest behind Abhay's head on the back of his chair, her small hand gripping the edge of the chair. Her left hand hangs by her side, gripped in a fist. She is barefoot. With his left hand, Abhay steadies his 2-year-old by Pacha Prayagraj, a glaring infant on his lap. The boy, seeming to scream, his baby legs and babe foot dangling by his mother's knee. Abhay seems a bit amused by the son on his lap. Abhay is a handsome Indian man, his wife an attractive woman, both young. Also, behind Abhay stands his nephew Tulsi and his brother Krishna Charan. Sitting on the far right is Abhay's sister Rajeshwari, dressed in a widow's white sari, holding Sulakshmana, Abhay's daughter, on her lap. Sulakshmana is also squirming, her foot jutting towards a photographer. In the center sits Gaur Mohan. His face is shriveled, and his whole body is emaciated with age. He's also wearing a white kurta and dhoti. His hand seems to be moving actively on his lap, perhaps with palsy. He's short and small and old. So, Abhay traveled frequently throughout northern India, intent on expanding his sales. It was not unusual for him to be gone a few days in a week and sometimes a week or more at a time as he traveled from one city to another. The pharmaceutical industry was just beginning in India, and doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies were eager to buy from the competent, gentlemanly agent who called on them from Bose's laboratory of Calcutta. He would travel by train and stay in hotels. He liked the feeling of freedom from home than traveling that traveling afforded, but the real drive was servicing accounts and getting new ones. That was his business. Riding in a third class unreserved compartment and was often uncomfortable. The only seats were benches, which are often dirty, and passengers were permitted to crowd on without reservations. But that is how Abe traveled hundreds of miles every week. As the train moved between towns, he would see the numberless small villages and then the country land that spread out before him on either sides of the track. At every stop, he would hear the cries of the tea vendors as they walked alongside the train windows. Chai, chai, tea. The British has introduced it, and now millions of Indians are convinced that they could not get through the morning without their little glass of hot tea. As a strict Vaishnava, Abhay never touched it, but his wife, much to his displeasure, was becoming a regular tea drinker. Although Abhay was accustomed to dressing as a European businessman, he never compromised his strict Vaishnava principles. Most of his fellow Bengalis had taken up fish eating, but Abhay was also careful to avoid non Vaishnava food, even at hotels. Once at a vegetarian hotel, the Empire Hindu Hotel in Bombay, he was served onions, and sometimes hotel people tried to serve him mushrooms, garlic, and even eggs. But all of these he carefully avoided. Keeping a small semblance of his home routine, he would take his bath early in the morning with cold water. He followed this routine year round, and when in Saharanpur he did so during the bitter cold weather, the hotel keeper was greatly surprised. Abai conversed with many people in his travels. A doctor in Dhaka told him that on his way to the office, he had passed a farmer talking to a friend and could tell by the sound of for the farmer's cough that the farmer would die within few hours. Another doctor told Abhay that he had just come from seeing a pneumonia patient who was dying, who was defying nature and medical science by continuing to live. He met a Mohammedan doctor in Gaya, who lamented that he had just lost a patient, although he had given the man the very best medicine. So, such accounts from men of the medical profession confirmed Abhay's conviction that God's sanction, no one could be saved. Without God's sanction, no one could be saved. Not that he ever thought of his medical sales as a philanthropic work, but this the Saraswati had already convinced him that only way to save a person was by giving him Krishna consciousness. Abhay's medical products were strictly for business. So, on one business trip, it was in 1925, he traveled through Agra, only 40 miles south of Vrindavan. Taking the opportunity, he made his first visit to Holy Vrindavan, fulfill his childhood aspiration. He loved the sight of Vrindavan, but he could spend only a day or two. Even a single day from his sales work would be critical. As a reverent pilgrim, Abe visited a few temples, especially the principal temples established by the followers of Lord Chaitanya. But he had not moved. But he had to move on.
Shall I read Prabhuji from here?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly
Okay.
something, Matai, for a minute.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been just way appreciating um, two things. One is Prabhupada also tells in the Bhagavad Gita purport that how, when Arjuna asks Krishna what happens to the yogi who has not completed in the previous birth.
Mhm.
And Krishna tells if one has practiced for a long time, they will take birth in the transcendentalist family.
Mhm.
So, uh, here I'm thinking, if, if Krishna willing, if it doesn't happen, to go back to Krishna this birth, so how the life would be, and it is showing uh, how how it will be to practice Krishna consciousness. Like really, 20 years he was like really feeling dry, like
Mhm.
waiting for Krishna, waiting for Guru, and then Guru comes, but then the family responsibilities, the business responsibilities are holding. So may our hearts opened up to receive the blessings of Krishna. And also the example of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also, he was also born in the transcendentalist family. And also many practical examples, like how Prabhupada was giving charity, his heart is there fully devotional, and he's trying to live a life, take care of the family, is still heart tied in devotion. And now he's going to take chance, opportunity to go to Vrindavan. Yeah, please take on, Mataji.
There were also risks in traveling. Once he was sitting in a train compartment in Mathura station when a monkey suddenly entered and took away his belongings. Early one morning before dawn, while he was on his way to Kanpur in a two-wheeled horse carriage, the horse was going at a fast trot when suddenly it hit a large heap of rubbish in the middle of the road. The carriage turned upside down. Horse, driver, and carriage all landed in a heap, and Abhay was thrown into the air. But he landed unharmed, feeling as though he had just changed to another seat. Because Abhay sat but said nothing, the driver thought he had been knocked unconscious and became anxious. The passenger was all right, however, and the driver considered it a miracle. Since the cart had so violently ejected him, Abhay took it that he had been saved by Krishna, and he remembered the similar incidents starting with his childhood when his clothing had caught on fire. Krishna had always protected him. For 5 years, Abhay traveled widely out of Allahabad, and when he was home, he put in long hours at the dispensary. But he also spent time with his wife and played with his children. Srila Prabhupada, when my son was about 2 years old, he was very naughty, always doing some mischief. My friends used to visit me and call my son Pacha. Pacha, if you sit down for 1 minute silently, I will give you a gift. But the boy failed. He could not sit down, even for a minute. There was a table fan, and Pancha was wanting to touch it. I said, no, no, don't touch. But again, he tried to touch it. So my friend said, just lower the speed and let him touch it. So I unplugged the fan and he touched it. Then he touched it. It did not harm him, but it hit his finger with a loud noise, tongue, and then he would not touch again. I would ask him, touch again, but he would not. As soon as his daughter, Sulakshmana, could speak, he began teaching her the Bengali translation of the prayer Guruvastakam, which begins, the spiritual master is receiving benedictions from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. The spiritual master extinguishes the blazing fire of material life, of repeated birth and death. Except for his obligatory travels, Abe stayed at home and satisfied his family. He tended diligently to his business and it prospered. It was Kumbh Mela, January 1928. Bhakti Pradeepa Tirtha Maharaja was of the Gaudiya Mutt, had come to Allahabad with a few men. One day he walked unannounced into the Prayaga pharmacy, and all of a sudden Abhay was seeing them again after so many years. Oh, these are the people I saw before, he thought. Gaudiya Mutt, yes, come in. Bhakti Pradeepa Tirtha Swami was the same sannyasi who had visited Narendranath Mulik in Calcutta, a visit that had led to Abhay's going to visit Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, folding his palms in a humble gesture, standing before Abhay in simple saffron khadi robes, his shaven head with a tuft of shikha in the back, his forehead marked with Vaishnava tilka. Tirtha Maharaja said to Abhay, "We are new here. We are going to establish a temple in Allahabad. We have heard your name, so we have come to you. Please help us." Abhay was joyful. "Yes, I will help you." He contributed what money he could and then introduced Tirtha Maharaja to Dr. Ghosh, who also contributed. Abhay invited the Gaudiya Mutt devotees to come to his home and hold a bhajan and a lecture. His wife would cook prasadam. They accepted, but when they arrived, there was a misunderstanding. Gaura Mohan, who was invalid, was staying in his room upstairs. "Please come down," Abhay called. "There is a meeting of the Gaudiya Mutt." Gaura Mohan came downstairs, but when he saw the sadhus, he mistook them for impersonalists from a non devotional mission. He had not heard correctly what Abhay had said. Gaura Mohan took his seat, but he observed the saffron clothed men solemnly and even made a critical remark. Abhay, who was enlivened at the opportunity to associate with the Vaishnavas and hear from the Krishna Katha, could not understand his father's behavior. Then, as soon as Bhakti Pratipa Tirtha Swami began his lecture, Gaura Mohan understood, "Oh, they are Vaishnavas." He cried. Old and invalid as he was, he immediately fell down at their feet. "I misunderstand you, sir. I thought you were sannyasis from another mission. I am glad to meet you." After Kumbh Mela, Pradeepa Tirtha Swami left, but 5 or 6 brahmacharis, disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, stayed on in Allahabad, maintaining a small Mata headquarters. They worshipped the deity, held an evening program of kirtana and lecture, and preached actively to the local people. The devotee in charge, Atulananda Brahmachari, who visit the homes of Allahabad citizens, trying to solicit subscriber members for the Mata for half a rupee per month. A person would receive a subscription to the Gaudiya Mutt magazine. In the course of his door-to-door soliciting, Atulananda knocked on the door of Abhay Charan De. Abhay received him very hospitably and offered him some rice and fruit. Abhay was very receptive to the philosophy and relished discussions with Atulananda, who made it a point to visit Mr. De repeatedly and speak with him about Lord Chaitanya and the Bhagavad Gita. Abhay also inquired into his recent activities of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. By now, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had established the Gaudiya printing works in Calcutta and had begun to publish the Srimad Bhagavatam in several volumes with his own annotations. He had also published an edited version of Sri Chaitanya Bhagavata from his center in Dacha. He had opened centers in Bhubaneswar, Madras, and Puri. Abhay's interest was insatiable. Atulananda told him how in 1925, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had led a big procession circumambulating the holy land of Navadvipa, with deities riding on the backs of gorgeously decorated elephants and with devotees from all parts of India attending. Envious professional priests who opposed Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's acceptance of disciples from all castes had employed a gang to help them hurl bricks and rocks on the procession. But Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had continued undaunted. In 1926, he had toured throughout India, preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya. He had also installed deities in the large temple of Sri Chaitanya Mutt in Mayapur. And a year ago, he had begun publishing his magazine, Sajana Toshani, in three languages, including an English edition called The Harmonist. After several visits and discussion and after several visits and hours of discussion on the activities and philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Atlanta brought Mr. Dey to the Allahabad ashrama. Shortly thereafter, the Mata relocated to a rented house on South Malacca Street near Rambagh, just a short walk from Abhai's home. Now it was possible for Abhay to visit every evening. After work, he would attend the Mata, where he would play the Mrudanga, surprisingly the brahmacharis with his already developed Mrudanga playing skills. He sang
Mm.
bhajanas with them and sometimes took the lead part in the congregational singing. He would also bring important persons from Allahabad to visit the Mata. For the brahmacharis, Abhay seemed to give new life to their ashrama, and for Abhay, new life had come to him in his reunion with the disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Mm. Vanita Mataji, do you want to read, Mataji? If not, I can continue, but I will summarize some points, Prabhuji, here.
Mataji, I'm cooking actually. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, but since you joined, I am asking Mataji. That's it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I'll let you know when next time.
Okay, sure. Up to here, Prabhuji, like nicely, like Atlananda, like they established a small mata in Allahabad that made Prabhupada easy. Every evening he can go to mata, and the brahmacharis also used to get a lot of benefit from Srila Prabhupada because he used to give in charity, and he used to play mrudanga and singing also every day. So some arrangement, and and every time he used to honor all the sannyasis, give donations, and he used to respect sannyasis, and he used to inquire what the Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Swami is doing. His mind and heart are always on his Guru Maharaj. In 1930, Gaura Mohan's health took a turn for the worse, and his family members gathered around him, thinking that his end had come. Abhay had been in Bombay on business, and it was late when he reached Allahabad. I knocked on the door. Gaura Mohan told his daughter Rajeshwari, "Open the door. Abhay has come." She replied, "No, he is in Bombay." Gaura Mohan repeated, "I tell you that he has come. You open the door." It was about midnight. She went downstairs, opened the door, and found that her brother had indeed come. Abhay went to his father. "How are you?" "I am all right." Gaura Mohan replied, "You just take rest for the night." The next morning, Abhay called the doctor. "How your father is living, we don't know." The doctor told him he has practically no pulse. He has been living without food for several months. Abhay asked his father, "What is your wish? Tell me. Why are you asking?" His father replied, "Has the doctor told you anything?" Abhay said, "No, I am asking because I am staying in Bombay and you are here. So if you have any wish, any intention, let me know. I am here. I am here for you. Gaura Mohan told him to give their cow to the Allahabad Gaudiya Mutt. So Abhay took the cow along with their calf and donated them to the Mata. Then again he asked his father, "Have you got any other wish?" And again his father said, "Has the doctor told you anything?" "No, no. I am simply asking because for my business I have to go." Then Gaura Mohan said, Invite all the Gaudiya Vaishnavas of Allahabad and other Vaishnavas also. Let them chant Harinama in the evening and you supply them with good food. That is my wish." Abhay arranged it, and in the evening of the Harinama started. At 11 o'clock, all of them took prasadam and left. That night, Gaura Mohan passed away. Oh Krishna. Abhay felt the loss of his father painfully. His father had given him everything he had ever wanted, had been careful to raise him as a pure Vaishnava, and had always worshipped Radha and Krishna. Although Abhay was a competent young man, he felt lost with his dearmost protector and friend more than anyone else. Gaura Mohan was the one who had always guided Abhay and treated him as the most special person. Without his father, Abhay now felt hopeless. He suddenly felt the same dependency he had felt as a small boy, but now without his father, the one who had always treated him as a pet son, deserving all loving attention, the one who had given him whatever he had wanted, and who had liberally prayed to every holy man. He met that his son become a great devotee of Srimati Radharani. That best well-wisher was now gone. On the day of Shraddha, 13 days after Gaura Mohan passed away, Abhay and his brother uh, posed for a formal photograph. In accordance with the religious custom, the two sons had shaved their heads. The photograph shows Abhay and his brother sitting on either side for a formal portrait of their father. The portrait is on an elevated stand and is surrounded with dark cloth. The picture is nicely framed. Gaura Mohan looks old but still thoughtful and intent. Not so old as in the former portrait, where he had looked emaciated with eyes almost dimmed. Abhay, with his head shaved, looks like a renounced monk, and his body is covered with robes of a monk. Simple drapes in broad folds covering the upper and lower parts of his body. He looks quite different than he had in the picture that was taken in the same place, with the same rough carpet on the floor years before. In that picture, with his wife and children gathered around him, he was very much the young householder, surrounded by his responsibilities of family and looking like he knew how to conduct himself well and move energetically in the world. But in this photo, although his children are present, they are seated unattended on the floor. Abhai's left hand is on his knee, poised and yet at rest, whereas in the former picture, his left hands had been folding his restless son. Abhai's wife is not present. In this picture, Abhay looks striking. One cannot tell that he usually has a head of hair and a mustache, which he has only recently shown for the mournful observance of his father's passing away. Instead, this seems to be his natural appearance. There is a mysterious sir, spiritual
Air.
air about him, as one might expect in a meditating saint. His look is neither agitated nor cheerful nor sorrowful. It is peaceful and knowing, as if he had suddenly become a sadhu on the day his father had passed away. He looks like the sadhu his father envisioned he would become. He looks as he is, all and always was a sadhu, and has suddenly been revealed as such on this day, even by the most casual inspection of the photo. It appears that by shaving his head and dressing in robes with no shirt or shoes, Abai had become a sadhu.
Hmm. So that completes our chapter,
3. Chapter 3.
meeting a very nice saintly person.
80%.
And then the next chapter is, how shall I serve you? How shall I serve you? So, you want to share some experience, Mataji, from your reading?
Yes, Prabhuji. Seem like nice passing of Gaura Mohan Day, because a nice kirtan, after rice kirtan, he told his son to feed all the Vaishnavas. They ate and he left his body and donated a cow. Donating a cow is more good than any
Yeah.
other donations. Nice
Yeah.
2 things he did before leaving his body. And his father was a kind of Shiksha Guru, since a Shiksha Guru to him, he was left alone. He was thinking, and he was sad. Prabhupada was sad because since from the beginning, his father wants him to become a good Vaishnava and a nice devotee of Srimati Radharani. See, Prabhuji, like here, his mood is the topmost, Gaura Mohande's mood. He met that his son become a great devotee of Srimati Radharani, the best well-wisher that was now gone. He used to pray for Radharani, that his son should become a great devotee. But he left his body. And the last things are, of course, in a sad mood, like Prabhupada is in a sad mood. And he has to move on because the whole family is dependent on him. So many responsibilities. Yes, family person.
That's the life.
That's the life, Prabhuji. Yeah.
That was really moving, really, like, to hold on to Prabhupada shelter, who is our living
See,
pure
Prabhuji,
devotee.
like how he worked very hard for us, Prabhuji. See, like total life, he has struggled a lot. The last moments, since from the beginning, he used to help lot of Vaishnavas, that Gaudiya Mat, Atulananda's Mat in Allahabad.
Yeah. Nice. Banita Mataji, Bhakti Mataji, you want to share any of your highlight experiences from today? I don't know when you joined, Banita Mataji, missed you to ask you for reading.
Yes, Prabhuji. I was like kind of confused, like when it's going to be the reading session, because Prabhupada Maharaj program was going, So sorry, today I was totally.
We finished Maharaj programs yesterday, so we started. And
okay.
With Prabhupada's mercy, we want to do from 5 to 7.
I'll do tomorrow. I will keep in my mind and I'll join. So
sure.
Yeah, but I just joined very late. But I have one highlight, which is like how Prabhupada's dad, like he passed away. So it's like your whole life is like ups and down, because when you're living under shelter under older people like so you are just free of your liabilities and all the duties and everything. So that makes a realization, like how when we miss our parents, so it's like a big, like, blessing, all the time we have blessing with us, so yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, sure, Mataji. Okay, Mataji, so we will come back tomorrow. trying to learn the mode. Mode of Prabhupada, how shall I serve you? We'll see about it tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripa sindhubhyo cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namah.